You write in the Wall Street Journal, Chairman Pai, that if on December 14th the commission votes to repeal the Obama-era net neutrality regulations, net neutrality is kind of a euphemism, but I guess at this point the branding's worked, so we kind of got to run with it. But you write in that op-ed, consumers will benefit from greater investment in digital infrastructure, which will create jobs, increase competition, and lead to better, faster, and cheaper internet access, especially in rural America. A great portion of this of the audience of the Howie Carr Show right now, and on our Newsmax audience, they live in rural America, and this would benefit them. So, kind of, can you walk me through how repealing these regulations will benefit consumers, people who are working in this industry, and especially rural Americans?
I'd be happy to. And to me, at least, this issue isn't just professional. It's also personal. I grew up in rural America in a small town that's 3 hours south of Kansas City. And so I know what it's like when internet access is not where you want it to be. And to me, at least, rural consumers in particular, their main gripe with their ISP isn't that the ISP is blocking access to lawful content. It's that there isn't enough access at all, or there's not enough competition. And ironically, these internet regulations imposed by the Obama administration take us in the wrong direction. These heavy-handed rules are making it harder for businesses, especially smaller businesses, to raise the capital, to invest that capital in building networks in smaller towns where the business case is already hard enough. And I've seen it for myself in places like Spencer, Iowa, and Parsons, Kansas, and rural Nevada, that these are the small companies that we need to promote more competition and investment. These internet regulations imposed over the last 2 years are simply taking us in the wrong direction. And that's why going back to the market-based approach will give these companies of all kinds a much stronger incentive to invest in internet access going forward.
Okay, so what will that incentive be? So if you're an internet service provider, say a smaller internet service provider, and the December 14th vote is in favor of repealing these regulations, how does that change your calculus when it comes to investing in internet infrastructure that could serve rural Americans?
Two different ways. One is that you won't have to comply, spend all these resources complying with these heavy-handed regulations, and so you can devote that scarce capital instead of lawyers and accountants to technical folks who can build out networks. And I've spoken, for example, with a fixed wireless provider who's told me that instead of building out a network further into the outskirts of Little Rock, Arkansas, we're having to spend that capital making sure that our P's and Q's are minded at the FCC. Secondly, instead of the FCC also micromanaging how service plans are offered, one of the things the FCC's internet regulations do is allow the agency to start fly-specking, for example, free data offerings by wireless carriers. Well, wireless carriers can now compete by offering free services or discounted services to consumers in a way that they wouldn't have been able to before. And so in these ways, we're enabling a much more competitive market for internet access, and that benefits consumers.
We're talking with FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. He's a Republican appointed by President Trump, and we're talking specifically about the upcoming vote on December 14th to potentially repeal internet regulations passed under Obama. And for a lot of conservatives, a lot of people listening, they might not understand the technical specifics of how the internet works. I certainly don't. But the fact that you're repealing something that the Obama administration put in place, that's enough for them. That they're sold on that. But there are a lot of, there are a lot of conservatives, Chairman Pai, who are worried about the effect that this will have on major media companies, the consolidation of media in the liberal areas like New York and Washington, D.C., allowing these big media companies that we decry as fake news to have more and more control over the programming on local access, throttle internet access to conservative radio shows on the internet or conservative websites. So what do you say about some of the conservatives who are a little worried about this?
Well, I would say a couple of things. Number one, that is exactly why we need to get the internet under private hands instead of having the government regulate all of it. Look, whoever controls the government, the last thing we want is for that person to be picking winners and losers in the marketplace, and that's exactly why we don't want these internet regulations to persist going forward. The second thing is that's exactly why as well that we need much more competition in the marketplace, and that our regulations are designed to do that by promoting all kinds of companies in all of these different sectors to have the maximum incentive to compete. Because when there's a competitive marketplace, if you don't like what you're hearing on one station, you switch to another. If you don't like how one broadband provider is doing business, you can switch to another. That, I think, is the ideal way to solve that problem, not heavy-handed micromanagement from Washington.
Now, you've also proposed a review of TV station ownership cap rules, basically that it gets to this idea of, are we going to have this one single company in New York City determining what people in Nebraska and Kansas are watching in their local news? Is this review going to take place before the net neutrality vote, or is that going to come after?
So we've teed up that decision at the same meeting, but it's only teeing up the question about what is our authority here. And so we haven't yet formed up any decisions in terms of when we'll actually make a final decision on that question. All we're simply doing here is asking what is our authority under the law to raise the national ownership cap or to re-examine it. And if the record shows that we don't have that authority, then okay, we're done. No new decision to make.
Okay, Chairman Pai, there's one of the criticisms that I've seen of the effort to repeal net neutrality regulation is that internet service providers are going to fundamentally change the way you interact with the internet. But by that I mean they're going to make it so just having a connection to the internet doesn't guarantee access to every website that you would want to visit. So do you see, if we repeal these regulations, is there a scenario coming in the future for Americans where you buy an internet plan and your internet plan says you can go to Netflix, you can go to Facebook, but you're going to have to pay extra if you want to go to, say, Amazon, or you're going to be buying a select group of websites that you're allowed to visit, as opposed to buying that connection and having the freedom to visit any website you choose?
Absolutely not. And not only that, we haven't seen that in the past when we had these internet regulations for 20 years, starting in the Clinton administration. And so strange as it is for a Republican chairman to say that President Clinton got it right, in this regard he did, to say that a market-based vision was the right one for the internet. It didn't allow companies to have that kind of influence over what we saw, and yet it still maintained market-based regulation. Secondly, if you look at where the threats are coming to that sort of thing, it's not coming from internet service providers. It's coming from different companies who might not like the content that's carried on their networks, and they simply censor them. And that, at least, I think, is something that people need to be worried about, not the FCC's regulations being the only thing standing between us and a free market of online expression.
Well, Chairman Pai, thank you very much for being with us here on the Howie Carr Show. If somebody wanted to learn more about this issue, where would you ask them to go? Is there a website or a resource that you would ask them to go to?
Absolutely. I would go to our website at fcc.gov, and if you look on our website, you'll find the exact plan that I'm proposing, which is another distinction from the previous administration, which they only released the plan weeks after it was voted on. I'm releasing it now so you can read it for yourself and make up your own mind. You can also follow me at Twitter at Ajit Pai FCC.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chairman Pai, for being with us here today. We really appreciate it. Very enlightening interview. People net neutrality might not be on your radar, but I can promise you guys that it's something that's going to influence your life. It's going to influence certainly future generations for a very long time. And